The faint hum of the old refrigerator was the most consistent companion in Eleanor Vance's small apartment. It was a monotonous, low thrum, a mechanical heartbeat in a space where human interaction was a rare and treasured anomaly. Every evening, as dusk bled into the muted grays of her living room, Eleanor performed the same ritual. She would carry a single plate, a chipped ceramic relic from a forgotten past, to the small, round dining table positioned awkwardly by the window. There, the only reflection staring back at her was her own, a faint, almost translucent image superimposed over the darkening cityscape. The fork would clink against the plate with an exaggerated resonance in the quiet, each movement a deliberate act of sustenance rather than enjoyment. The air, perpetually still, carried the subtle scent of old paperbacks and the faint, metallic tang of dust that stubbornly clung to the corners of the room. She ate slowly, meticulously, her gaze often drifting to the street below, not seeking a familiar face, but rather observing the anonymous dance of car headlights and distant figures, a silent observer in the grand theater of urban life. Her apartment, though clean and orderly, echoed with an emptiness that went beyond mere physical space. The worn Persian rug, a hand-me-down from a distant relative, bore the faint imprints of furniture long since departed. The curtains, thin and faded, offered little resistance to the intrusive gleam of the city's nightlights. Eleanor's life was woven from the same muted threads as her surroundings. Mornings began with the precise measurement of coffee grounds for a single cup, followed by hours hunched over her ancient laptop. The screen, a beacon in the otherwise dim room, illuminated her face as she delved into intricate financial spreadsheets and market analyses. Her fingers, long and slender, danced across the keyboard, inputting complex algorithms, tracing the volatile lines of stock charts, and dissecting economic reports. She consumed data with the quiet intensity of a scholar. Yet there was no outward sign of the vast knowledge she processed, no external validation for the internal world she meticulously constructed. She sipped plain black tea from a slightly chipped mug as she worked late into the night, the bitterness a suitable complement to the austere focus of her existence. It was a life lived simply, almost ascetically, a stark contrast to the prodigious financial intellect that hummed beneath her reserved exterior. In the bustling sprawl of the city, Eleanor was an invisible woman. Her neighbors knew her only as the quiet resident of Unit 3B, a shadow flitting in and out of the building. She rarely exchanged more than a polite nod. Her eyes, the color of deep sea glass, holding a distant, almost guarded quality. She moved through life with a deliberate anonymity, her modest, somewhat outdated clothing serving as a uniform of invisibility. No one knew of her past, of the brilliance that had once flickered brightly before dimming into this self-imposed solitude. Whispers, if any, were vague and fleeting. The quiet one keeps to herself. She preferred the rustle of turning pages in the library to the cacophony of human voices, the disciplined logic of numbers to the unpredictable chaos of emotion. Despite this profound self-imposed isolation, Eleanor was not cold. Her detachment was a shield, carefully forged from the embers of past hurts and disappointments. Beneath the unyielding surface, a deep reservoir of empathy lay dormant, a quiet current that rarely broke through the placid waters of her outward calm. Yet, there were moments, fleeting and unexpected, when this innate compassion would surface, guiding her hand despite her ingrained caution. And it was precisely one such moment, on a crisp autumn afternoon, that would subtly, irrevocably, begin to unravel the meticulously woven fabric of her solitary life. Eleanor was returning from her weekly visit to the public library. She frequented the hushed aisles of the financial section, absorbing every new theory, every historical market crash, every innovative investment strategy. She was a silent, voracious learner, though no one at the library ever seemed to notice her quiet intensity. As she walked down a tree-lined street, the fallen leaves crunching under her sensible shoes, she saw him, A small boy, perhaps 6 or 7, sat on the curb, his knees drawn up to his chest, his tiny frame racked with sobs. Around him, a scattering of copper and silver coins lay forlornly on the uneven pavement, spilled from a brightly colored, now shattered, ceramic piggy bank. Passers-by, engrossed in their own hurried lives, either pretended not to notice or offered quick, pitying glances before continuing on their way. Eleanor paused, her hand gripping the worn strap of her shoulder bag. Her first instinct, honed by years of avoiding entanglement, was to move on, to remain a silent observer. But the child's heartbroken wails, the sheer, unadulterated grief over a handful of coins, struck a chord deep within her. It was a raw, vulnerable sorrow that echoed her own past losses. The shattering of dreams, the scattering of what once felt precious. It was a familiar ache, too profound to ignore. Without a moment's hesitation, and without a single word, Eleanor knelt. Her practical wool coat brushed the dirty pavement. Her long, slender fingers, accustomed to the delicate dance over a keyboard, began to carefully gather the scattered coins, separating the pennies from the nickels, the dimes from the quarters. She worked with a quiet efficiency, her movements precise and deliberate. The child, surprised by this sudden, gentle presence, slowly lifted his tear-streaked face. Eleanor didn't make eye contact. She simply focused on the task, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she had collected every last coin, she counted them, then reached into her own purse. Finding a shiny quarter, she added it to the meager pile, making up for a coin that seemed to have vanished down a storm drain. She then placed the small fortune, neatly stacked, into the child's trembling hand. "Here you go, little one," she said, her voice soft, almost a murmur. "They're all here, and a little extra, just in case." The child, still sniffling, looked at her with wide, grateful eyes. Just then, a kindly-faced woman with soft wrinkles around her eyes approached, her expression a mix of concern and recognition. This was Sarah Peterson, a local real estate agent whose office, Heritage Homes, was small and struggling, overshadowed by larger, flashier agencies. She was the child's grandmother. Sarah had watched the entire scene unfold from across the street, a silent witness to Eleanor's unexpected act of compassion. She had seen the fleeting expressions of indifference on other faces, and then the quiet, determined kindness of this unassuming woman. Sarah's heart warmed. There was a quiet strength in Eleanor, a deep, genuine goodness that contradicted the reserved exterior. A seed of curiosity, a flicker of appreciation, took root in Sarah's mind. As Eleanor continued her quiet life, the mystery that veiled her was subtle, largely unremarked upon by those around her. In her small apartment, a single, faded photograph occupied a prominent spot on her modest nightstand. It was a picture of a house, not just any house, but a sprawling, magnificent Victorian home. Its intricate gingerbread trim and turreted roof speaking of a bygone era of grandeur. The photograph was old, its colors muted by time, yet it held a vivid place in Eleanor's heart. She would often trace its lines with a gentle finger, her eyes, usually so composed, softening with a deep, almost aching longing. This house, somewhere in the city, represented a dream, a promise of stability and belonging that seemed utterly incongruous with her current, unassuming circumstances. It was a whisper of a different life, a future she meticulously, secretly, planned. Beyond the photograph, another subtle clue existed: her old notebooks, scattered across her desk, tucked beneath her laptop, or even carried in her worn handbag. These notebooks were filled not with mundane grocery lists or daily appointments, but with dense, hand-drawn diagrams. These weren't mere doodles. They were intricate geometric patterns that hinted at complex algorithms, or meticulously charted stock market trends that bore the hallmarks of a brilliant financial mind. If anyone ever approached her desk, Eleanor would swiftly, almost instinctively, snap the notebook shut, her movements conveying a silent plea for privacy, a desire to guard the secrets contained within those unassuming pages. There was a subtle tension in her movements, a guardedness that suggested she was constantly shielding a hidden world from prying eyes. Eleanor Vance carried the heavy burden of a past financial trauma, a silent scar that dictated the contours of her present life. Her family, once comfortable, had lost everything in a catastrophic market downturn years ago, a collapse that had shattered their sense of security and left her with an indelible sense of vulnerability. This deeply ingrained trauma had forced her to retreat from the glittering, high-stakes world of finance, a realm where her prodigious talent had once shone brightly. She had chosen anonymity, a quiet existence where the risks were minimal and the potential for emotional devastation was contained. The public world, with its judgments and its fickle rewards, was a place she had deliberately avoided, fearing the very spotlight that her genius might attract. Her internal conflict was a constant, simmering battle. One part of her yearned for the peace that isolation offered, the safety of being unjudged, of not having to meet the overwhelming expectations of others. Solitude had become her fortress, a balm for a deeply wounded soul. She had witnessed the perfidy of the financial world, the envy and the betrayal, and she had vowed never again to expose herself to its harsh realities. Yet, another part of her, a persistent, undeniable yearning, cried out for connection, for belonging, for a home that felt truly hers. She missed the intellectual sparring, the thrill of complex problem-solving, the satisfaction of creating something substantial. She felt the heavy weight of her dormant talents, underutilized and suppressed, a constant, invisible burden. She knew she possessed a vast knowledge, an innate ability that set her apart, but she had convinced herself that displaying it would only bring more pain, more scrutiny, more potential for loss. This duality manifested in subtle contradictions. Her apartment, though small and humble, was meticulously organized, a reflection of a mind that was once rigorously disciplined. Her movements were precise, her gestures measured, betraying an underlying efficiency. Sometimes, listening to the snippets of financial news on the radio in a public place, she would find herself effortlessly understanding complex market reports that others simply glossed over, and she had to consciously suppress a knowing nod or a quiet, insightful remark. It was a self-imposed prison, a voluntary exile, where the only freedom she sought was the freedom from being seen, from being known. Every evening, as the city lights began to twinkle in the distance, Eleanor would sit by her window, watching the last vestiges of daylight fade from the sky. The city's distant murmur was her only company, a symphony of anonymous lives. In those moments, her face, usually so impassive, would soften. Her eyes would close for a brief instant, and the silent, complex equations of her mind would reassert themselves, fragments of past triumphs, of ingenious solutions, of lessons learned in the cutthroat world she had abandoned. These were the echoes of a life she had chosen to leave behind, but one that stubbornly, defiantly, still resided within her, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Despite her deep-seated reluctance to engage, the small act of kindness she had shown to the child and his grandmother, Sarah Peterson, had subtly begun to chip away at her defenses. Sarah, who had witnessed that moment, became a quiet, consistent presence in Eleanor's periphery. Sometimes, when Eleanor passed Sarah's struggling real estate office, Sarah would offer a warm smile, a simple nod that conveyed understanding without intrusion. Eleanor would return a small, almost imperceptible smile, her eyes. Sarah noticed, conveying more gratitude than her lips ever would. Sarah never pressed for conversation. She simply offered a spark of human connection, a small window into a world where genuine kindness still existed, without expectation or judgment. But the world, relentlessly, had other plans for Eleanor Vance. The carefully constructed quietude around her was about to shatter, not by her own choosing, but by the crude hand of external forces. A shadow, one of casual arrogance and systemic prejudice, was poised to fall upon her, threatening not just her chosen sanctuary, but her very dignity. The silent strength Eleanor had cultivated for so long was about to find its voice, and that voice, when finally unleashed, would reverberate far beyond the confines of her small apartment, changing not just her own destiny, but the very landscape of a neighborhood. The Victorian house stood on Crestwood Avenue, a proud, turreted sentinel overlooking Heritage Heights. Its intricate gingerbread trim, painted a faded robin's egg blue, hinted at a past grandeur, a quieter era before the city's relentless expansion. For years, this house had been the silent, yearning centerpiece of Eleanor Vance's dreams. It was the house in her faded photograph, the architectural embodiment of stability, security, and a belonging she had never truly known. Every morning, on her meticulous route to the library, she would detour past its wrought iron gates, her gaze lingering on its stained glass windows, imagining a life within its walls. When the for sale sign appeared on its manicured lawn, a tremor of both excitement and trepidation ran through Eleanor. It was an opportunity she had secretly yearned for and meticulously planned for, but also one that brought with it the uncomfortable spotlight she so carefully avoided. Today was the open house, the moment of truth. She had dressed in her usual modest attire, a sensible tweed jacket, dark trousers, and her well-worn but clean walking shoes. A deliberate choice to blend into the background, to observe rather than be observed. The very act of stepping into that grand house, of allowing herself to hope, felt like a transgression against her carefully constructed walls. The air inside the house was thick with the scent of old wood, beeswax polish, and the nervous energy of prospective buyers. Sunlight streamed through the leaded glass windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, forgotten dreams. Eleanor moved quietly from room to room, her fingers lightly tracing the carved banisters, her eyes absorbing every detail: the ornate fireplaces, the pocket doors, the expansive library with its built-in shelves. This wasn't just a house. It was a promise, a canvas for the future she envisioned, a redemption for the past she sought to outrun. As she stood in the grand foyer, admiring the mosaic tile floor, a figure emerged from the drawing room. He was a man of imposing height, clad in a crisp, dark blue police uniform, his badge gleaming under the chandelier. This was Officer Miller, a local beat cop whose patrol route frequently took him through Heritage Heights. Miller was a man whose self-importance swelled with each stripe on his sleeve. He possessed an almost pathological arrogance, a thinly veiled disdain for anyone he deemed beneath him, especially those he suspected of trying to infiltrate the exclusive enclave of Heritage Heights. He saw the neighborhood not just as a collection of properties, but as a bastion of privilege, a place to be protected from undesirable elements. Unbeknownst to many, Miller had a personal agenda, a side deal brewing with a shrewd, unscrupulous developer named Victor Sterling, who sought to acquire several key properties in Heritage Heights through less than transparent means. Miller, in exchange for a hefty sum, was tasked with ensuring that no unsuitable buyers, particularly those who might disrupt Sterling's plans, gained a foothold in the neighborhood. Officer Miller's eyes, cold and assessing, swept over Eleanor. He took in her unassuming clothes, her slightly worn handbag, the quiet dignity that seemed to cling to her like a second skin. He registered her complete lack of ostentation and dismissed her instantly. To him, she was an anomaly, an interloper. He approached her with a slow, deliberate gait, his posture radiating an air of authority. "Looking, ma'am?" he asked, his voice laced with a condescension as thin as a veil. "This neighborhood usually fetches a pretty penny. Nice place. Wouldn't you say don't think this place is quite in your league?" His words, though seemingly casual, were a blunt instrument designed to wound, to remind her of her perceived place. He watched her face for any sign of fluster, any immediate retreat. Eleanor felt the familiar, bitter sting of humiliation. It was a sensation she knew all too well, a ghost from her past that whispered tales of inadequacy, of dreams shattered by financial ruin. Her first, most deeply ingrained instinct was to retreat, to disappear, to fold back into the comforting shadows of her anonymity, to simply nod, offer a polite but vague excuse, and slip away, back to the quiet safety of her apartment. The urge was almost overwhelming, a primal instinct for self-preservation. Yet, as she stood there, the scent of old wood and the sunlight filtering through stained glass enveloping her, the deep longing for this house, this almost mythical symbol of stability and belonging, clashed violently with her ingrained fear. It wasn't just a desire for property, it was a yearning for a new beginning, a profound sense of redemption that this house, and the life it represented, promised. And then, as she met Officer Miller's cold, dismissive gaze, something else stirred within her, a stubborn defiance, dormant for years, began to flicker, then ignite. It was a quiet flame, but it burned with a fierce, unyielding heat. This was not just about buying a house. It was about dignity, about justice, about proving that assumptions based on appearance are not just misguided, but profoundly, arrogantly false. Officer Miller, misinterpreting Eleanor's initial silence as sheepishness, a confirmation of his preconceived notions, pressed his advantage. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, designed to be overheard by other potential buyers and the real estate agent, Sarah Peterson, who was busy with another couple nearby. "You know," he continued, a sneer playing on his lips, "we get all sorts around here. Folks with big dreams, small pockets. Some types, well, they just don't fit in. Don't want to bring down the property values, if you catch my drift." He even took a subtle step closer, his uniform a silent, intimidating presence. "I've seen your type from the wrong side of the tracks, ma'am, trying to reach for something beyond their grasp. Take my advice, attempting to buy above your means would be a big mistake. A lot of paperwork, a lot of scrutiny. Save yourself the trouble." He subtly gestured towards the main street outside, a clear implication that she should just leave. This public humiliation, delivered at the very threshold of her deepest desire, was the spark that ignited the unyielding resolve within Eleanor. It wasn't just an insult, it was an assault on her dignity, a direct challenge to her very being. The man before her wasn't just dismissing her, he was dismissing her dreams, her worth, her right to aspire. The echoes of her past financial failures, the whispered judgments of others, surged forward. But this time, they didn't crush her. Instead, they fueled a quiet fury, a righteous indignation. Eleanor's eyes, which had been downcast for a moment, slowly, deliberately, lifted to meet Officer Miller's gaze. There was no longer fear or shame in their depths, but a quiet, intense fire. It was a cold, unwavering flame, born from years of suppressed brilliance and newly awakened indignation. Her hands, which had been clenched at her sides, subtly uncurled. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor of defiance ran through her. In that moment, something shifted irrevocably. The possibility of retreat vanished. The battle was no longer just about owning a house. It was about reclaiming her dignity, shattering the glass ceiling of prejudice, and proving that the invisible woman was, in fact, a formidable force. There was no turning back from this challenge. The quiet storm had finally broken, and Eleanor Vance was ready to face it head-on. The air in the grand Victorian house, still thick with the lingering scent of old wood and the hushed whispers of hopeful buyers, shifted. Officer Miller's condescending remarks hung heavy, designed to dismiss and demean. Yet, for Eleanor, they had done the opposite. The sting of humiliation had morphed into a quiet, steely resolve. Her gaze, now unwavering, held a challenge that Officer Miller, blinded by his own arrogance, completely missed. He expected a retreat, a flustered exit. What he got instead was a quiet, determined step forward. Eleanor, ignoring Miller's continued presence and his expectant sneer, turned her attention to the real estate agent, Sarah Peterson. Sarah, with her kind eyes and a tired but persistent smile, was discussing the intricacies of a mortgage with another couple. Eleanor approached her, her movements deliberate, unhurried. Sarah, recognizing Eleanor from the previous week's encounter, offered a polite but somewhat wary smile. She was used to casual browsers, especially those who seemed more drawn to the house's aesthetics than its daunting price tag. She extended a standard brochure, her politeness tinged with a practiced reserve born from years of dealing with tire kickers and, more recently, the not-so-subtle pressures from Officer Miller to filter out certain types. "Good afternoon, Miss Peterson," Eleanor said, her voice calm and clear, a stark contrast to the agitated whispers and strained laughter of the other visitors. "I'm interested in the property. I have a few specific questions, if you have a moment." Officer Miller, who had deliberately lingered nearby, pretending to examine a portrait but clearly listening, smirked. He anticipated vague queries about room sizes or paint colors, easily dismissed. He leaned slightly against the doorframe, a picture of smug satisfaction. Eleanor, however, did not ask about paint colors. Her first question, delivered with an almost academic precision, cut through the superficiality of the open house. "Could you provide a detailed breakdown of the recent market valuation trends for Heritage Heights, specifically analyzing the compound annual growth rate of properties within the historical overlay district versus the broader city average over the last 5 years? I'm particularly interested in any anomalies stemming from the 2018 zoning amendment regarding mixed-use development." Sarah Peterson blinked. Her polite smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise. This was not the typical question from a prospective buyer. Her professional training kicked in, but her mind raced to keep up. Well, the market's been robust," she stammered slightly, reaching for a file. Eleanor, without waiting, continued, her voice gaining a subtle, almost imperceptible momentum. "And regarding potential rental yields, assuming a phased conversion of the West Wing into a boutique bed and breakfast, what are the projected net operating incomes given the current occupancy rates of similar historic properties in adjacent upscale neighborhoods, factoring in seasonal fluctuations and a conservative 2% vacancy rate? I've run some preliminary models, but I'd like to compare your agency's projections." Sarah's eyes widened. She had dealt with serious investors before, but their questions were usually broader, less granular. This woman was speaking her language, but with a fluency and depth that surpassed even her own considerable expertise. Eleanor's questions weren't just knowledgeable, they were strategic, revealing a mind that had already performed a deep dive into the property's financial intricacies and its place within the broader market ecosystem. It was an unveiling of financial acumen, a quiet roar of numbers that belied her unassuming appearance. Officer Miller's smirk slowly evaporated, his brow furrowed in confusion. He recognized the jargon net operating incomes, vacancy rates, market valuation trends. These were the terms he heard from the city's wealthiest developers, the very people Victor Sterling dealt with. He dismissed Eleanor as a working-class dreamer, but her words now painted a different picture, a far more dangerous one. He subtly shifted his weight, no longer nonchalant, but alert. Eleanor, oblivious to Miller's discomfort, pressed on, her questions growing more complex. Furthermore, the property's historical designation. Which section of the city's Historic Preservation Act are we currently operating under? And have there been any recent amendments to tax incentives for maintaining period-specific architectural integrity? I'm keen to understand the full financial impact of such preservation efforts, not just the upfront costs, but the long-term tax benefits and potential grants. Sarah, now completely captivated, found herself fumbling through her files. a genuine look of awe replacing her initial wariness. Well, the house falls under... Wait, are you referring to the 2017 amendments to the state historic tax credits? Most people don't even know those exist, she exclaimed, her voice filled with a professional respect that bordered on reverence. You're models. You've run models on this property. Eleanor simply nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible curve of her lips. Preliminary ones. Yes. I believe the potential for appreciation, given proper management and leveraging of available incentives, is significantly underestimated in the current market analysis. It seems there's a unique arbitrage opportunity here, particularly if one considers the long-term demographic shifts in the adjacent districts. The silence from Officer Miller was deafening. His face, which had been a mask of smug amusement, now registered pure bewilderment, then a creeping unease. He was no financial expert, but he recognized the language of power, the confident ease with which Eleanor navigated a world he barely understood. He knew, instinctively, that this was not the type of person Victor Sterling wanted acquiring properties in Heritage Heights. His casual dismissal of her was not just wrong, it was spectacularly wrong. He had underestimated her to a degree that was professionally humiliating, even if no one else knew it yet. A flicker of suspicion, cold and sharp, ignited in Miller's mind. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? Her modest appearance was clearly a ruse, a disguise. His arrogance quickly morphed into annoyance, then a simmering resentment. This unassuming woman, with her quiet demeanor and her disconcerting knowledge, was a threat. She threatened his judgment, his authority, and potentially his lucrative side dealings with Sterling. Miller cleared his throat loudly, interrupting Eleanor's flow, his voice regaining some of its bluster, though with an underlying tremor of uncertainty. "Listen, ma'am," he interjected, stepping fully into the conversation, his posture more rigid. "For a property of this caliber, there are extensive background checks, financial scrutiny, community vetting. We like to ensure our residents are, suitable. And from what I hear, some folks just don't have the kind of visible professional history that would qualify them for such a prestigious purchase. Just making sure you're aware of the hurdles involved." He subtly implied that she wouldn't pass. A veiled warning to back off. Eleanor simply met his gaze, her eyes unblinking. "I assure you, officer," she replied, her voice still calm. "I am fully aware of all legal and financial requirements, and I welcome any scrutiny. Transparency is, after all, the bedrock of sound investment." Her composure was maddening to Miller. He escalated, his voice dropping to a lower, more menacing tone, meant for her ears alone. "And we local authorities, we like to keep an eye on things around here. Make sure everything stays orderly. We tend to notice when new faces pop up with unusual interests. Just a friendly heads up." The thinly veiled threat was clear. He was personally invested in keeping her out, and he would use his position to make it difficult for her. As soon as he could discreetly excuse himself, Officer Miller's hand instinctively went to his cell phone. His mind was racing, a chaotic mix of fear and anger. He needed answers. He walked quickly to a secluded corner of the house, pulling his phone to his ear. He dialed a number he knew by heart, a contact in the city's zoning office, a man he had on his payroll. "Hey, it's Miller. Listen, I need you to run a deep dive on someone. Eleanor Vance." "Yes, that's her. I want everything: financial records, tax history, employment background, any unusual activity, any skeletons in the closet. Focus on her financial standing, her eligibility. Find anything that could disqualify her from buying property in Heritage Heights. I'll call you back with the address." He hung up, his jaw clenched. Then, he made another call, this time to Victor Sterling, the developer. "Sterling," he began, his voice tight with suppressed frustration. "We've got a problem. There's a woman at the open house, Eleanor Vance. She's not what she seems. She's asking questions. Real sharp questions. She's clearly got money, and she knows the market. She's too smart, too quiet. She's a threat to our plans. We need to find something, anything, to stop her, immediately." Miller's suspicion festered into a deep-seated annoyance. He began to spread rumors in the local police precinct, casual whispers about an odd character with a shifty look, trying to buy into Heritage Heights, hinting that she was probably some kind of grifter or up to no good. He intended to build a narrative around Eleanor, a reputation that would precede her, making it difficult for her to gain any ground in the community. His intent was clear: to disqualify her, not through legitimate means, but through insinuation and the subtle abuse of his authority. The quiet roar of Eleanor's numbers had shattered Miller's complacency, revealing not just her hidden brilliance, but the insidious depths of his own prejudice and corruption. The battle for Heritage Heights had just begun, and it was far from over. Officer Miller's frustration simmered, a bitter brew of bruised ego and thwarted ambition. Eleanor Vance, the unassuming woman he had so readily dismissed, had proven to be an unexpected and infuriating obstacle. Her quiet display of financial acumen at the open house had not only humiliated him, but had also sent ripples of concern through Victor Sterling's carefully laid plans. Sterling, a man whose ambition matched Montalvo's, now understood the threat Eleanor posed to his discreet acquisition strategy for Heritage Heights. Miller, eager to appease Sterling and regain his perceived authority, hatched a plan. It wouldn't be a direct confrontation, but a subtle, insidious campaign of public scrutiny designed to expose Eleanor's perceived unsuitability and drive her out. His chosen arena for this psychological warfare was the grand, opulent City Hall auditorium. This historic venue, usually reserved for mayoral addresses and city council meetings, was a symbol of the city's established power, a place where the elite gathered and decisions were subtly swayed. It was, for Miller, the perfect stage to showcase Eleanor's perceived deficiencies and reaffirm his own influence. He leveraged his connections, pulling strings within the city administration, to convene a formal Heritage Heights Neighborhood Review Committee meeting, ostensibly. The committee's purpose was to vet potential buyers for the prestigious properties in the district, ensuring they met the high standards of the community. In reality, it was a thinly veiled trap for Eleanor Vance. The meeting was set for a Tuesday afternoon, a time strategically chosen to maximize the attendance of the neighborhood's old guard, retirees with ample leisure time and a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. The air in the auditorium was thick with anticipation. The velvet seats, usually filled with the city's movers and shakers, now held a mix of curious residents, skeptical community leaders, and a handful of local journalists, tipped off by Miller's carefully placed whispers about a controversial new buyer. At the head of a long, polished mahogany table sat the committee members, a panel of stern faces, mostly elderly, all deeply entrenched in the social fabric of Heritage Heights. Among them was Mr. Jenkins, a condescending loan officer from the city's most prominent bank, Sterling National Bank. Miller had personally chosen Jenkins, knowing his reputation for conservative lending practices and his ingrained skepticism towards anyone outside the established social circles. Jenkins, a man who saw success only in terms of established wealth and pedigree, was the perfect tool to present a financial obstacle for Eleanor. Eleanor attended the meeting alone. She wore the same sensible tweed jacket, her hair neatly pulled back, her only accessory her worn handbag. She carried no documents, no flashy presentations, no entourage. She was a solitary figure against the imposing backdrop of the auditorium, a quiet woman facing a panel of skeptics and a murmuring crowd. Her presence was a stark contrast to the perfectly tailored suits of the committee members and the subtly ostentatious jewelry worn by many of the Heritage Heights residents. She walked to the designated spot before the table, her posture straight, her gaze calm, though a quiet hum of nervous energy thrummed beneath her composed exterior. Officer Miller, strategically positioned at the side of the committee table, a smirk playing on his lips, took the microphone. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating with an artificial gravitas. "We are here today to discuss the eligibility of Ms. Eleanor Vance to purchase property within our esteemed Heritage Heights community. As you know, we pride ourselves on maintaining the integrity and exclusivity of this historic neighborhood. We must ensure that any new resident is suitable." He then turned his gaze towards Eleanor, his voice dripping with thinly veiled condescension. "Ms. Vance, while we appreciate your interest, the committee has some concerns regarding your rather unconventional background. Specifically, your lack of a visible, sustained professional history that would typically qualify one for such a prestigious purchase in a neighborhood of this caliber." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, allowing the murmurs of the crowd to swell. He subtly encouraged other committee members with a glance, urging them to pick up on his line of questioning, to cast doubt on Eleanor's financial viability. The large clock on the wall, a prominent feature of the auditorium, began its relentless tick, time remaining 1:30. 90 minutes for Eleanor to defend herself against the combined weight of their prejudice and Miller's deliberate machinations. The pressure in the room mounted with each tick of the clock. Mr. Jenkins, the loan officer, took his cue. He adjusted his glasses, a picture of corporate authority. "Ms. Vance," he began, his tone dripping with professional disdain, "my office, Sterling National Bank, has reviewed what limited financial information we could obtain regarding your assets. Frankly, based on standard underwriting criteria for properties of this value in Heritage Heights, and given the rather unverified nature of your income sources, a mortgage in this amount would be virtually impossible. We've noted some unusual financial movements, large sums appearing and disappearing from various accounts, which, I must say, raise significant red flags from a risk assessment perspective." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, implying that Eleanor's finances were either illicit or simply non-existent for a legitimate purchase. He was echoing the dirt that Miller's contact in the zoning office had uncovered, carefully twisted to serve his purpose. The committee members exchanged glances, their skepticism deepening. A few residents in the audience whispered amongst themselves. The tactic was working. They were painting Eleanor as either financially irresponsible or, worse, involved in something illicit. "Perhaps, Ms. Vance," Miller interjected, his voice smoothly insidious, "you could enlighten the committee on your professional background. Where have you been employed for the last, say, 10 years? What is your current source of income that would allow you to consider such a significant investment?" He knew Eleanor's file, meticulously compiled from his contacts, would show nothing conventional. His questions were designed to trap her, to expose her lack of a traditional, verifiable career, and thus her supposed inability to afford the house. Eleanor remained calm, her gaze fixed on Miller, then on Jenkins. The clock kept ticking, every second amplifying the tension. She knew this was a calculated attack, designed to break her composure, to make her falter and withdraw. The ghosts of her past financial failures, the whispered judgments of others, tried to reassert themselves, threatening to overwhelm her. But the quiet defiance that had sparked in her at the open house now burned steadily, fueled by the sheer injustice of the situation. This isn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been judged for their appearance, every dream dismissed by the arrogant and the prejudiced. The silence stretched, a bated breath held by the entire auditorium, waiting for her to stumble, to admit defeat. But Eleanor Vance had no intention of falling. She straightened her shoulders, a subtle shift in her posture that conveyed an unyielding strength. The pressure was immense, the time ticking away, and the weight of their skepticism palpable. Yet, in that moment, she felt a clarity, a cold precision that had guided her through far more complex financial landscapes. This was her ultimate test, and she was ready to face it. The air in the opulent City Hall auditorium crackled with a palpable tension. The relentless tick of the large clock on the wall, now showing less than an hour remaining, hammered against the silence. Officer Miller leaned forward, a triumphant glint in his eye, confident that his calculated assault had cornered Eleanor. Mr. Jenkins, the loan officer, adjusted his tie, a condescending smirk fixed on his face, believing his financial dismissal had sealed her fate. The committee members, their faces etched with skepticism, waited for Eleanor to finally falter, to confess her inadequacy. The murmuring crowd, a mixture of curious residents and eager journalists, leaned in, expecting the inevitable capitulation. Eleanor Vance, however, did not flinch. Her eyes, calm and unwavering, scanned the faces before her, Officer Miller's smug arrogance, Mr. Jenkins's professional disdain, the committee's wary judgment, the crowd's silent anticipation. She took a deep, almost imperceptible breath, the kind of breath a master strategist takes before executing a perfectly planned maneuver. The past, with its whispers of failure and humiliation, attempted to surface, but she pushed it down, transforming its bitter energy into a cold, precise focus. This moment, this public arena of judgment, was not about her past. It was about her future, and the future of Heritage Heights. When Mr. Jenkins delivered his final dismissive financial projection, implying that Eleanor's assets were insufficient and her income untraceable, Eleanor didn't immediately dispute his points. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, with a deliberate slowness that commanded attention, she reached down beside her chair. From the worn handbag that Officer Miller had so readily dismissed, she pulled out not a single document, but an old, well-worn leather briefcase. The leather was supple, almost ancient, hinting at a long history, a past unknown to those gathered. She placed it gently on the polished mahogany table before her. A ripple of confusion ran through the committee. Miller's brow furrowed. Jenkins squinted, intrigued despite himself. Eleanor's movements were precise, unhurried, almost ritualistic. She unlatched the briefcase, the metallic click echoing in the hushed room. From within, she extracted a stack of neatly bound legal documents. Each document, pristine despite its age, bore the official seals of the City Planning Department, the County Registrar's Office, and various legal firms. Slowly, methodically, she laid them out on the table, one by one. Each placement was deliberate, a silent statement. The first deed, then the second, the third. The committee members squinted, trying to read the addresses. Officer Miller's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine alarm replacing his smirk. Mr. Jenkins leaned forward, his professional curiosity overriding his disdain. "Mr. Jenkins," Eleanor began, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the growing tension. "Officer Miller, members of the committee, I believe there's been a slight misunderstanding regarding my financial capabilities and my intentions for Heritage Heights." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "I am not here today to apply for a mortgage on one house." The declaration hung in the air, a single, potent sentence. The room was utterly silent. No one coughed, no one whispered. All eyes were fixed on Eleanor, then on the growing stack of deeds. "Over the past several months," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining a quiet power that filled the vast auditorium, "I have been quietly acquiring properties in this esteemed neighborhood." She gestured to the stack of deeds. Each of these documents represents a fully paid-off title to a different house in Heritage Heights. Her slender finger glided across the top deed. "This one, for instance, is for 142 Crestwood Avenue, directly across from the park." She moved to the next. "And this, 150 Crestwood, the historic Oakwood Manor." Her voice listed address after address, each one a familiar, cherished landmark in the neighborhood. A collective gasp swept through the audience. Sarah Peterson, watching from the first row, clutched her chest, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. Her lips parted, but no sound escaped. The journalists scribbled furiously, their cameras clicking, trying to capture the expressions of disbelief on the faces of Miller and Jenkins. "In total," Eleanor stated, her voice as calm as a summer lake, "I have successfully acquired the titles to 27 properties within Heritage Heights." She paused, letting the sheer number sink in. "Including, I might add, the very Victorian house you tried to sell me, Officer Miller." Her gaze flickered to him, a subtle, knowing glint in her eyes. "Yes, that one was acquired last week through a private, all-cash transaction." Officer Miller's face went from shock to a grotesque mask of disbelief and sputtering rage. "Impossible, where did you— You couldn't have—" he stammered, his voice cracking, his smug composure completely shattered. He had been so convinced of her poverty, his own prejudice so blinding. Mr. Jenkins looked physically ill. His face, normally a picture of rigid confidence, was now ashen. The unverified income sources he had so disdainfully referenced were, in fact, the means by which this quiet woman had executed one of the most audacious, discreet property acquisitions in recent city history. The monumental error of his assumptions, the professional embarrassment he had just suffered, washed over him like a cold wave. His bank, his reputation, his entire understanding of the market were crumbling before his eyes. "And finally," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the rising murmurs of astonishment, "to address your concerns about the vacant lot next to the old park, Officer Miller." She reached back into her briefcase, pulling out one final, larger deed. The seal on this document was even more elaborate, signaling a significant land parcel. "I also own this property." She laid it on top of the stack, completing her silent, irrefutable declaration of ownership, which, I assure you, I have no intention of developing into more high-rise condos or a parking garage. Instead, I plan to convert it into a community garden and green space, accessible to all residents of Heritage Heights. She then unrolled a set of meticulously drawn blueprints and detailed financial projections, not for speculation, but for revitalization. "My vision for Heritage Heights," she continued, her voice now resonating with a passionate conviction that electrified the room, "is not one of gentrification or exclusivity, but of sustainable, community-led development. These blueprints detail a comprehensive plan for historic preservation, energy-efficient upgrades for existing homes, and the creation of shared community spaces, my foundation, which I am now officially announcing. Vance Community Trust will oversee this initiative, ensuring affordability for long-term residents, supporting local businesses, and fostering a truly inclusive environment. This isn't a speculative venture, Mr. Jenkins. It's a meticulously researched community development project, fully funded, designed to uplift this neighborhood while preserving its unique soul." She revealed her true identity then, simply stating, "Some of you may recall the Phoenix Fund investment group from roughly a decade ago. I was the anonymous principal behind that venture. After its successful liquidation, I chose to withdraw from public life. But Heritage Heights, and the values it represents, have called me back. The Phoenix Fund, a legendary anonymous entity that had turned a modest initial investment into a vast fortune through brilliant, unconventional market strategies, was finally unmasked. Eleanor Vance, the quiet woman in the tweed jacket, was the recluse financial genius, the anonymous mogul who had discreetly amassed a fortune before disappearing from the financial world. The room erupted. Gasps turned into exclamations, murmurs into a rising tide of applause. Sarah Peterson, tears streaming down her face, stood up, clapping furiously, then turned to the astonished crowd, urging them to join her. The skepticism on the faces of the residents transformed into awe, then cheers, then outright jubilation. They saw not just a wealthy woman, but a visionary, a protector, someone who had silently understood their struggles and had moved with brilliant precision to save their homes, their heritage, their very way of life. They were witnessing not just a legal victory, but a moral triumph, a vindication against the forces of greed and prejudice. Officer Miller's face contorted into a grotesque mask of fury, then slowly, agonizingly, morphed into utter defeat. His carefully constructed prejudice, his casual dismissals, his attempts to sabotage her, all had crumbled into dust. He looked utterly vanquished, a small, petty man exposed. Mr. Jenkins, the loan officer, stared at the table, his complexion sickly pale, his jaw slack, the weight of his professional misjudgment a crushing burden. The media, a frenzy of flashing lights and rapid-fire questions, swarmed around Eleanor, capturing every angle of the astonishing revelation and the crowd's ecstatic reaction. Eleanor, once dismissed for her appearance, stood tall, the quiet roar of her numbers now echoing as a masterstroke of vindication, a testament to her quiet power and unwavering resolve. The thunderous applause in the City Hall auditorium reverberated long after Eleanor Vance had finished speaking, a symphony of vindication that swept through the once skeptical crowd. The news of her masterstroke, broadcast live and amplified by social media, spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the city and beyond. The Phoenix Fund revelation, coupled with the dramatic unveiling of her ownership of nearly the entire Heritage Heights neighborhood, became an overnight sensation, overshadowing even the most scandalous political headlines. The narrative was undeniable. The quiet, unassuming woman, once dismissed by a prejudiced authority figure, had not only proved them wrong but had done so with a quiet brilliance that shattered their arrogance. For Officer Miller, the downfall was swift and humiliating. The viral video of the boardroom battlefield became his public undoing. His condescending remarks, his thinly veiled threats, and his visible shock at Eleanor's revelation were played on a loop across local news channels and internet forums. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. Citizens, tired of casual abuse of power, demanded accountability. An internal investigation was swiftly launched by the police department, initially a reluctant gesture, but quickly gaining momentum under the glare of public scrutiny. The investigation, led by a newly appointed, reform-minded internal affairs officer, unearthed a pattern of misconduct far more extensive than initially suspected. Miller's undisclosed dealings with developer Victor Sterling, his attempts to collude in the acquisition of properties through intimidation, and his general abuse of authority came to light. The evidence, meticulously compiled from digital footprints and witness testimonies, was irrefutable. Within weeks, Officer Miller was formally stripped of his badge, ignominiously fired from the force, and faced a public outcry that led to the loss of his pension and the very real possibility of legal charges for corruption and misconduct. The man who had once swaggered through Heritage Heights, a self-appointed gatekeeper of privilege, became a pariah, his authority crumbling into dust, his reputation irrevocably stained. His carefully constructed world of power and prejudice had imploded, leaving him with nothing but the bitter taste of public scorn. Mr. Jenkins, the loan officer from Sterling National Bank, suffered a different, yet equally painful form of defeat. The footage of his dismissive financial assessment, followed by Eleanor's calm, irrefutable reveal of her vast holdings, became a case study in professional misjudgment. His arrogance, once a badge of honor in the banking world, now exposed him to ridicule and severe professional embarrassment. He was publicly chastised by the bank's board of directors for his lack of due diligence and his prejudiced assumptions. Deeply mortified by the public humiliation and confronted by the undeniable evidence of Eleanor's genius, a profound shift began within him. He issued a formal, televised apology to Eleanor, a stiff but seemingly sincere admission of his bias, and a promise to advocate for more equitable lending practices within the financial industry. The apology, while somewhat forced by his institution, felt like a genuine turning point for Jenkins himself. He resigned from Sterling National Bank shortly thereafter, rejecting any golden parachute or severance package. His transformation continued as he dedicated himself to working for a nonprofit organization focused on affordable housing initiatives. Using his vast financial expertise, he began assisting low-income families in navigating the complex world of mortgages and property acquisition, ensuring they received fair treatment and access to the financial resources they deserved. The man who had once denied Eleanor a mortgage based on appearance now devoted his life to helping others, a testament to the unexpected power of public humiliation as a catalyst for redemption. For Eleanor, the immediate aftermath of her public triumph was a whirlwind of recognition and opportunity. Journalists from major national and international outlets clamored for interviews. Television networks offered her primetime slots, and prestigious universities extended invitations for her to speak on urban economics and social entrepreneurship. The quiet, anonymous life she had cultivated for years was abruptly shattered, replaced by a level of public attention she had deliberately avoided. Offers for lucrative partnerships, advisory roles on corporate boards, and even direct political endorsements flooded her inbox. The world of high finance, which she had silently departed, was now calling her back, not as a victim, but as a legend. Yet, Eleanor surprised many with her measured response. While she accepted a select few speaking engagements to share her vision for community development, and carefully chose strategic partnerships that aligned with her core values, she largely declined the most glamorous and financially tempting offers. Her focus remained steadfastly on Heritage Heights. She made the magnificent Victorian house, the very one that had been the catalyst for this entire saga, the headquarters of her newly announced Vance Community Trust Foundation. It stood as a potent symbol not just of her triumph, but of the transformation she envisioned for the neighborhood. The house, once a private dream, was now a public promise. In the quiet of a late autumn afternoon, with the golden light filtering through the stained glass windows of the Victorian house's library, Eleanor and Sarah Peterson shared a rare moment of peace. The room, filled with the scent of old books and freshly brewed tea, was a sanctuary from the ongoing media frenzy. Sarah, her kind eyes twinkling with a mix of awe and affection, sipped her tea. "I still can't quite believe it, Eleanor," Sarah said, a soft smile on her face. 27 properties, the entire neighborhood, and to think, I almost dismissed you that day at the open house, just like Officer Miller. She shook her head, a self-deprecating laugh escaping her lips. Eleanor offered a faint smile, a genuine warmth in her eyes that rarely reached her public persona. "You didn't dismiss me, Sarah. You showed me kindness when I was feeling most vulnerable. You helped that little boy, and you looked at me with curiosity, not judgment. That meant more than you know." She paused, gazing out the window at the familiar tree-lined street. "After what happened to my family, I lost faith in the financial world. I believed that wealth was inherently corrupting, that ambition always led to greed and loss. I retreated, hoping to find peace in anonymity, to rebuild my life quietly. But when I saw what Officer Miller and Victor Sterling were doing, the blatant disrespect for this community, it ignited something in me. I realized that my silence, my withdrawal, was a form of complicity. I had the knowledge, the resources, to fight back, and I couldn't stand by and watch Heritage Heights be destroyed. So, you chose to fight for us," Sarah said softly, her eyes welling up slightly, "and in doing so, you found your way back to yourself." "Perhaps," Eleanor murmured, a wistful quality in her voice. "I chose to use my knowledge, not for personal gain, but for something meaningful. This neighborhood, it called to me. It needed me. And in its fight, I found my purpose again. It's a different kind of wealth, Sarah, one that can't be measured in bank accounts." Their conversation, a quiet, contemplative dialogue amidst the grandeur of the newly acquired Victorian, solidified their bond. Sarah, who had first seen the hidden kindness in Eleanor, now recognized the profound wisdom that lay beneath. Eleanor, in turn, found in Sarah a genuine friend, a compassionate soul who saw beyond the labels and the headlines. The solitude that had once defined Eleanor's life was now slowly transforming into a deep, abiding sense of peace and belonging. A quiet satisfaction that resonated with the very soul of the neighborhood she had saved. The battle was over, the dust had settled, and the foundations of a new, vibrant legacy were being laid, brick by meticulous brick. Chapter 7. The Unfolding Canvas of Community. 5 years later, the once stagnant air of Heritage Heights, heavy with the dust of neglect and the tension of threatened displacement, now hummed with the vibrant energy of a thriving, inclusive community. The faded robin's egg blue of the Victorian house, now meticulously restored, stood as a beacon of this transformation, its intricate gingerbread trim a testament to resilience and renewed purpose. Heritage Heights was no longer just a collection of historic properties. It was a living, breathing testament to Eleanor Vance's vision, a place where history embraced progress and community flourished with purpose. The neighborhood, under the careful stewardship of the Vance Community Trust, had defied the typical trajectory of gentrification. Property values had stabilized, but strict, thoughtfully crafted regulations were in place to ensure long-term affordability for existing residents and to prevent speculative buying. The community garden, once a forgotten vacant lot, now sprawled with lush greens, vibrant flowers, and overflowing vegetable patches, tended by residents of all ages. Its laughter, the scent of freshly tilled earth, and the hum of bees were a constant reminder of the green space Eleanor had envisioned. Local businesses, once struggling against the tide of large corporations, thrived, supported by the Foundation's microloan programs and the renewed local economy. Heritage Heights had become a model of sustainable urban development, a place where quality of life, cultural preservation, and economic vitality coexisted harmoniously. Eleanor Vance, the quiet woman of Unit 3B, now lived a life of profound fulfillment, balancing the powerful acumen of her financial genius with a deeply personal, genuine human connection. The Victorian house, once her solitary dream, was now a vibrant community hub, its grand rooms often bustling with meetings, workshops, and communal events. Her once solitary apartment, a poignant symbol of her past isolation, had been transformed into a charming guest house for visiting urban planners, social justice advocates, and community organizers, a space of collaboration and shared vision. Eleanor herself became a beloved figure, her quiet strength and unwavering dedication earning her the deep respect and affection of the residents. She regularly hosted community potlucks in the sprawling garden, where children would tug at her sleeve to share their latest discoveries, and older residents would seek her advice, not just on financial matters, but on life itself. She conducted financial literacy workshops in the old ballroom, demystifying the world of investments and empowering residents to take control of their economic futures. Eleanor's commitment to paying it forward was etched into the very fabric of the Vance Community Trust. The Foundation's endowment, funded by her continued astute investments and the success of the Heritage Heights model, grew steadily. It provided full scholarships for local students from underserved backgrounds who wished to pursue degrees in urban planning, architectural preservation, and social justice, nurturing the next generation of community leaders. The microloan program, expanded and refined, empowered countless small businesses, from artisanal bakeries to local art studios, enabling them to thrive within the revitalized neighborhood. Eleanor herself became a sought-after mentor, quietly guiding young entrepreneurs and activists, sharing not just her financial insights, but also the hard-won wisdom of resilience and ethical leadership. She was actively involved in lobbying for fairer housing policies and more inclusive urban development practices at a national level, using her influence and powerful network to advocate for systemic change that would benefit communities far beyond Heritage Heights. On a crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, casting long golden shadows across Heritage Heights. Eleanor stood on the wide porch of the Victorian house. The air was cool and smelled of freshly cut grass from the community garden. Children's laughter, pure and unburdened, floated from the revitalized park nearby, where swings soared towards the darkening sky. Sarah Peterson, her face aglow with contentment, knelt in the flourishing community garden, gently tending to a robust rosebush, her quiet joy a reflection of the life Eleanor had helped build. Across the street, Javier Soler, now a respected advocate for housing rights, waved to Eleanor as he left a community meeting in one of the restored carriage houses, a symbol of his own redemption and dedication. Eleanor looked out at the thriving neighborhood, the lights twinkling in the homes she had saved and transformed. She saw not just houses and streets, but lives, families thriving, children playing, dreams taking root. She closed her eyes, and a profound sense of peace, a deep, abiding sense of belonging, washed over her. The bitterness of past traumas had faded, replaced by the quiet triumph of purpose fulfilled. Her quiet strength had not only saved a neighborhood, it had ignited a movement, a blueprint for a future where compassion and community could truly reshape the urban landscape. The invisible woman had become a visible force for good, her legacy woven into every brick, every laugh, and every flourishing garden patch of Heritage Heights. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.